Back in 2015, Jessica Hopper put out her last book, the first collection of criticism by a living female rock critic. To clarify for those who don't already have that, that is both what the book is and the title of the book. For those that have followed her work for years, reading her writing in Spin, The Village Voice, The Chicago Tribune, The Chicago Reader, Rolling Stone, BuzzFeed, Punk Planet, and many, many fanzines and more, including her own Hit It or Quit It. Reading pieces she facilitated as senior editor for Pitchfork, executive editor for MTV News, music editor for Rookie. Following bands she promoted through her former publicity company like At the Drive-In, The Gossip, not to mention some DC bands like Jawbox and The Dismemberment Plan. Now as editor for the American Music series put out by the University of Texas Press, which is doing really wonderful stuff with authors like Hanif Abdurraqib, and earlier this year, Chris Stamey, who we hosted here from the DBs. Again, for all those who have followed her work over the years, that collection felt like a culmination. And then word got our way that she had a memoir that was coming out called Night Moves, which also feels like a culmination of sorts. Calling it a memoir is not quite all of it, though. It's more of an image collection that captures many lasting moments, both the ostensibly mundane and otherwise, from life in the early millennium Chicago punk scene. It's a recreation of friend groups, club experiences, crying at heavy jazz shows, and other life highlights. And it's, to quote my friend and coworker Liz's staff pick, as shaky with youth as a Ferlinghetti poem. It's a map of Chicago that doesn't quite exist anymore, a city in a different stage of gentrification. And yes, there is a literal map at the front of the book with locations like Ukrainian Grind Bar, where Al left the house naked, and Yuppie Jizz Disco. Point being, there's nothing else that is quite like this book. Joining Hopper in conversation tonight is Katie Alice Greer, who, as member of our city's beloved band Priests and co-runner of the sister Polygon record label, might well be on her way to having the tools to make her own DC version of this book in future years. So please welcome them both to Politics and Prose.
Hi, thanks for coming. Can you guys hear me okay? I didn't think anybody was going to come. This is so exciting. Hi. I thought you were out of town. Everyone should go see Nate when he comes through with his book. I saw him present at a conference that has music critics, or nerdy conference. I saw him present some stuff from that book, and I learned so much about things that I care about. So that's really great. Hi, thanks for coming. I'm Jessica Hopper. I'm going to read from my book, and then we're going to talk a little bit. So this book is mostly about living in Chicago between 2004 and 2008, and when I was sort of a baby writer. And it's mostly about going out at night, and it's mostly about going out at night on my bike with my friends, almost exclusively. And so I'm going to read some things that illustrate all of those points. This is called There's a Light on My Bike That Never Goes Out. I love, got some stands in the house. Okay. We are off to Edmar, which is decrepit, Polish, and smells like only old grocery stores smell. A little mildew, a little grandma cologne, the musk of coriander. They're open till midnight and mostly sell jarred food. I got a hazelnut-ridden candy bar for $1. It was very big and thick and like those kinds I used to sell in order to go on class trips back in junior high. In the lot, I noticed for the first time on my new/old bike that I had one of those friction light generators, same as my roommate Chris's bike, the same kind of light that 3 minutes before I was calling magic. And voila, it turned out I had one too. I flicked the friction maker on the back into its lock spot, and with a mouthful of chocolate and a quick start, I illuminated my path into the wet Chicago night. I'm shining, I yelled to Chris, and reached out to give her a mini brick of the bar. We rode towards home, pulling the tinfoil off the candy and devouring it, powering our tiny lights in tandem. Chris would just hold out her hand and say, "More." I was so happy, as happy as I'd ever been. I told the man in the Jeep at the stop sign, "We have lights on our bikes," because I wanted him to notice, to not miss the opportunity to witness such safety and inventiveness in motion. I got all the way home, 4 blocks, and realized I could not be home. I had to go power the lights some more. Every time I saw someone I knew, I stopped, offered them a square of chocolate, and showed off the glow of my new light. See? They would eat the treat and then head in or out of the bar door, congratulating me on my newfound luminescence. I ran into Tilo, who was going into the Kilhannah, halfway to Halloween 18-plus dance party at the Nouveau Italian restaurant. She coaxed me in. Over approximately 7 minutes, I drank a water, wondered why every girl in the place thought a push-up bra / corset / underpants with a pair of Skechers was a costume, heard the Killers for the first time, and bummed a cigarette I only took 2 drags of from a daddy goth who rocked both a sparkly cowboy hat and Sherry Lewis's eyelashes. He called me babe and made that clicking sound like he was goddamn Telly Savalas. I checked out some asses, got back on my bike. I did not mean to stop at the bar with the big open windows where everyone looks good and seems wasted, but they yelled my name, beckoned me over. They were celebrating new tattoos and 23rd birthdays and dogs they loved and drinking 2 Berlin with many small bottles of champagne. I gave them my last candy squares. Then, from around the doorway, a boy I spent 6 years with appeared. He was working the door. You have treats? He asked. Nope, those were my last ones, I said. It was not supposed to be weird, but it was. I think he thought I was just being vindictive for that time he ruined 1997 through 2002. I held up the empty wrapper for evidence. Sorry. I hopped back on my bike, waved to the faded, and floated home, my little light showing the way. Has anyone ever been to Chicago before? Okay, good. Oh, okay, so like all of you, basically. So I don't know if maybe if you were there but maybe didn't live there, you didn't notice, but it's a grid city, and so there's certain streets that you can take and see the whole of the city, just by taking them across, and it's very much a city of neighborhoods. We're very true to our whatever. I don't know if that's like the official thing or some sort of marketing thing, but Chicago is a city of neighborhoods. So just by taking certain streets, you can see the entire thing. One of the streets that I lived closest to that was sort of my constant circuit through the city is called Damon Avenue, and this piece is mostly about that. It's called American City, I Love You Too. Since enacting my Lenten pact to only drive for work-related errands, I'm experiencing Chicago's deep, mantic powers on the daily. This is not to say that I do not love this hobbled city, potholed and blue-collared, from the moment I arrived 6 years and 3 days ago, but just that having a bike, and often on the same old route down Damon, I might as well be seeing it for the first time. All of the apartments illuminated with the blue glow of a TV, the living room walls gridlocked by mounted collector's plates, the scrub-clean dudes in light-rinsed jeans, drinking beer from a can on a leather couch, now viewed so easily due to the 2-story basement-to-ceiling windows in the front of their new construction condos, the patinaed crosses and gilded domes of all the bright Ukrainian churches, a dude in a red convertible Ferrari with vanity plates reading Ferrari, holding his dick while he cruises. It's just the stuff you miss when you're in the car with B96 up too loud. On Saturday, Al and Nora, the chain-smoking young sweetness that he hangs with, and I all biked 14.4 miles to the psychedelic art show over at Texas Ballroom in Pilsen. On the way, Nora and I chatted in the bike lane about girl stuff. On the way back, Nora lollygagged behind, and I took off ahead, seeing just how fast I could go on a friend's fancy track bike. I was reenacting scenes from Breaking Away on the barren byways in the heart of Cook County at 2 a.m. on a spring Sunday. Taking Damon Avenue from one side of the town to another, you get a good span of Chicago. Something practical to counter the highlights reel of Lakeshore Drive. Damon is all that is old, burnished, and lopsided. It is profoundly comforting to live in a city that doesn't give a shit and loves you just how you are, because it is every bit as marred, bereft, and cocky as you are. We came through Pilsen strip malls, past the 24/7 donut diner, over the freeway overpass where all the trucks exit from mills and factories, through Latino revitalization and Art Institute students tangling up on 18th, through 9 straight blocks of taquerias and storefront churches, past bondoed cutlasses springing to ni oompa oompa bandos, then through the 5 blocks of the tunnel underneath the train land bridge that is strangely clean because it's so vast and so sketchy that no one walks through it, not even to tag it, which empties out into the broken cement parking lots and sprawling brick warehouses that once served industries that no longer exist, past public housing bungalows isolated from their now demolished twin, the Ida B. Wells homes in Bronzeville, past Little Italy's ass end, through the hospital campus with its wide presidential appellative streets of Roosevelt and Washington and its Spartan gutters, into the direct arterials of downtown, over the bridge that spans I-290, through a near West Side neighborhood holding out against gentrification, past the parking lots of the United Center, trashed after the Bulls versus Golden State Warriors game hours earlier, past a long swath of empty lots and boarded-up CHA low-rises, tiny mountains of debris and weedy knolls on either side of the Green Line elevated tracks, the parts of West Madison Street that have never been rebuilt since being burned in the riots. Then underneath the tracks, where the best car chase in the Blues Brothers movies takes place, past 2 women singing Mary J. Blige songs on the corner, past a gaggle of hipster friends in funny outfits, waving and hugging while exiting a square dance at open end, past the Drag City office, underneath my favorite train bridge, then 3 more blocks, where I hung a ride on Ohio and rode no-handed, the last 2 blocks to my little house. So I'm going to read one more thing. So this book is, basically, during most of the duration of the book, I live in Chicago, but at one point I have to go to LA for a few months, and so this is what I wrote when I came home from LA. The day I came home from LA. It's called This Particular Heat. The score upon returning home, plants dead, cats alive. Back home, I went on a long walk with JR, then another with Ben. Big loops to get tacos and back both times. Same tacos for different people from the same place, many hours apart. Picante at 1:42 a.m. was all slobbery and slack-faced men of the office, nighted out and ousted by last call, dress shirts untucked over breakless casual pants. Their voices were loud, their jokes were louder, and their walk was a sideways amble, like that of a cartoon animal that's been hit on the head. On the curb, some white hats and a date night woman argued. I can too. I did too know that song was Radiohead. I love Radiohead. The teasing boy replied only, I'm getting a cigarette. She yelled back, I want a cigarette too. I did too know it was Radiohead. They were standing 5 feet apart, and I was standing between them. I believed her. She was emphatic. Those boys were just ragging on her. In Chicago, you're invisible to these people unless you're DJing or they are really wasted. You're a ghost unless you're a part of their crew, or at least part of their cast. The more drunk they become, the more they are aware of us scuffed-up bald kids. When they see you, they need to know, as if baffled by their sudden discovery, why are you eating your tacos over the trash can? Living in a city of drunk jocks will keep you punk forever. In LA, what can you even rebel against? The sprawl of humanity? The zombie Pat O'Brien and the Coachella VIP? White smog skies? Desire? I missed this boisterous, insular, tiny big city. Everything is smaller than I remembered. I feared I would come home and feel dislodged and adrift. But I don't. I feel home. We have so many choices for seating and amplification.
A lot of chairs. Check.
We can just run into the audience. Style.
Yeah, maybe
up and down the aisle.
That's more casual. I hope this will be conversational so that, people feel like they can take the conversation where they want to go.
Yeah.
I just finished this book over the weekend and really enjoyed it. So it was fun to hear you read some passages again. One of the first things that jumped out to me reading this was most of these passages have a date at the end of them. And I noticed that they were not put together in chronological order. There's some from like, what's the earliest it goes back
Like
to?
2000, early, like spring 2004.
Okay. And then the latest ones are like 2008, maybe?
Yeah, end of 2008.
So I wonder, what was your thought process like with the way that you organized those? Because it was obviously not like, oh, I'm just documenting, diary style in order.
I think part of it was I wanted to resist kind of the easy arc of it. And because I feel like, at the beginning, starting where it's like, oh, I'm a young writer with a dream. And at the end, I have my, I'm working on my first book. Like, it just felt kind of pat and kind of cute. And I feel like that book exists about 86 different ways. And,
sure,
there's probably somebody in Brooklyn who's writing that book right now, or like 12 people. And for me, what I wanted this book to be, and what I thought, these sort of diaristic pieces of writing that I had, what I thought they offered wasn't necessarily like so much that, like the story of a young writer, but more like a time and space, that some of it was very ephemeral, these sort of like DIY spaces and some of these times and places in Chicago in that moment, and this time and space where, in some of the earliest entries in here, there's not, like, people don't have smartphones yet.
Right.
And there's a lot less of that sort of playing a role in the story.
Right.
And so because of that, I felt like, I want to capture some of that more as a mood and a time and a space, rather than like a story that goes from A, B, on. And then we have like a salient lesson at the end. I just wanted it to be, as we say on the internet, a mood.
I think that was effective because it, as someone who around that time was getting a lot of music knowledge from blogs that I read on the internet, like it took me back to that. And I think this was a lot of this was taken from your blog that you kept at that time. Because you mentioned that in the book.
Part of it was, and then other parts were, like, sometimes when I would go on tour, when I was playing in bands, or I would do reading tours with, my roommate was also someone that did fanzines, Alberian, who was also a Punk Planet columnist. But sometimes we would go on reading tours, and I would make like little zines, or keep diaries from those tours too. And so, or kind of do like diaristic zines. And so like about 80% of the book is from that. Like the ribs of the book are definitely from like early internet writings.
Right.
Which at that time, the internet felt like a very different space than it does here today, October 2018. Where I was pretty positive I was speaking to kind of a closed circuit of people who were more likely than not directly involved in music scenes that I was, or places that, similar sort of things, or had a sort of shared DIY world, because then, like, otherwise why else would you be reading about, like,
right. And that's what
going to the Fireside Bowl,
that's what gave it such a nice, actually my housemate and I were talking about it. Kevin said there's a nice intimacy to the writing, because you get that sense that you're writing to people who you're kind of assuming they know what you're talking about, or if they don't, they're going to pick it up from context clues. I wonder, going off of this topic, I was sort of thinking about early 2000s blog era of how I was learning about culture, music, movies, books. I was a teenager trying to figure out what I was about, what I was into. And so that's where I got a lot of stuff from. Using social media now, it is useful for many things, but at least for me, this could be just subjective. I don't necessarily you don't get that intimacy with the way that people use social media anymore, because everyone is aware that they're kind of a billboard to a degree. This is such an interesting topic to me, but it's hard for me to formulate a question. I wonder if you...
I'll just riff.
Please. Yeah, please.
There's when I was editing the book last year, and there's passages where like my best friend JR, who this book JR's in it so much it's basically JR's memoir as well. So JR comes over to my house and we're hanging out with some friends, and he comes over sort of like excited, but like more like irascibly excited. I don't know what that word is. And he's like, I just heard about this band Vampire Weekend.
I love
and
that part.
He's like, I heard they sound like Graceland era Paul Simon. Is this true? Because at that time it was like, we didn't have smartphones, and also it was like, how we got music was, it was like maybe if there was something you didn't know about, you could go on like various sort of like primitive forms of how we got music on the internet. But the funny thing is like I had heard them, but I didn't have a way to play them for him. And so I just described to him what they sound like. And I don't think anyone's done that in quite some time.
Right.
Like that, those sort of interactions. And reading that, I perhaps the same way that you're like kind of nostalgic for that early blog era in terms of maybe discovery or affirming culture or opening you up to things. I sort of miss, and not necessarily like, I'm not like, oh, sad, nostalgic about this, but like, I miss that rather than just being like, oh, here, and just playing it for you, or being like, oh, I'll send you the files for this or whatever. But like literally having to sort of interact and like form and share the opinion IRL. I definitely sort of miss that. But that, there's another thing that also happens in the book that shows too a little bit how the ways in which, I mean, granted, it's like MySpace. Like, it's weird to be like, and we were excited because MySpace started happening. But
it was a different thing.
But that, one of the things that also happens in the book is like that there's, I think the phrase MySpace randos is in there perhaps, but where it's like people that you didn't know were showing up at the show because they were like, I live in Gary, Indiana, and I read about this on MySpace. And it was like the first time that maybe they could find out about a house show. And it was
Right.
like you could put something up on the internet suddenly, and like people you didn't know who also cared about the same things would show up, rather than like you had to kind of be in the know or be in like the radius of where the flyers for the show got distributed. And that was also exciting. And
Right.
that definitely like opened things up and made new scenes and things that were sort of adjacent to Chicago. So just to sort of generally talk, the internet, it happens during the book and it changes things.
Right. One thing that I like so much about your writing that really comes across in Night Moves is there are many casual observations. Like there's one about being at it's an Alicia Trout show, and just
River
sort
City
of
Tan Lines, I think.
yes,
was what
yes,
she was
that
in then.
right. And you were just kind of musing on why it's actually sort of a DC centric observation, but you're just kind of like, yeah, this woman, like she makes amazing music, she runs this mail order distro, she does all these things. I don't understand why she's not as revered as like Ian Mackay or somebody else, and just sort of like kind of daydreaming about that for a second. Yeah, and you had another observation about like Eraserata being this very kind of like, I think maybe you said like post Guantanamo Minutemen, which I also thought was like, it's very evocative, and like if you know the reference points, it comes across. It's a very logical but still creative way of just sort of drawing up a slightly different reality. And does that play into how you understand your process with writing? If this is a book about process, like how do you see your process with that stuff?
So I think the thing about, in particular, this is a great question. I think that particular imagination has less to do with my process and more has to do with my feminism. And that a big part of my feminism is, sort of hopefully imagining what's possible, but then also, sometimes measuring, like the measuring the chasm between like what is and what I want to be, and thinking about what I think could or should be rectified within that space. And so I think, particularly when it comes to going to shows, and I wrote about this at length in an essay that's in my other book called Emo Where the Girls Aren't, and about when I go to shows, I'm just always like, I'm just noticing, I just feel like I'm always just sort of measuring, like, the how particularly more early on, how women were in that space, how they could be in that space. Were they on stage? Were they in the audience? What was their reaction? How, were they working in this space? Did they have any like official duty in this space? Was this just all dudes, or like there's a part in the book where I'm at a free jazz show and I'm like the only women in the room, and that I wish that was like more unusual, particularly for the free jazz shows that I went to at that time. But I think that sense of sort of measuring, and it isn't necessarily like a tally, it's just sort of noticing. I think that part of my feminism is a huge part of my process.
That makes a lot of sense. Trying to think of what else I want to touch on here that wouldn't necessarily spoil the book. There's like one particular passage that I was like, oh, it's so good, but it's like, it's towards the end, and you were kind of musing on a building that you then discovered was like a Trump Tower building.
Yeah.
But you really avoided the sort of like, and now I'm gonna draw this like big epic.
Dude, that was there. That was there. So there's a spoiler in the book. Trump Tower is being built in Chicago, and I can see it from my bedroom like 4 miles away because of the way it's oriented in relation to the sunset, basically. So it just looks like it's like this glowing red orange thing, particularly in the summer, that's like, kind of incandescent. I live like 4 miles from it, but it almost has like a oracular role in that. But when I came upon that in editing it, and I hadn't. So in putting, just to clarify, so when I was putting together the book, well, I didn't necessarily put together the book. When I was working on my last book, which came out in 2015, it involved reading and going through basically like everything I'd ever written. And if anyone's looking for like something to just eviscerate your ego, I like super highly recommend like just start at like high school and then just read on your own work. But so in the process of doing that, I was working with my friend Alice to kind of just archive my work and organize my work, because it was like, through fanzines, through decades, through whatever, out in the wind. And as we were pulling things together, including my stuff off my blog, she said to me, you have all this writing about Chicago that totally doesn't fit with your book, but I think you should go back take a look at it. And by the way, I've assembled this and put it in Evernote and starred the things I think you should go back to and like classify. Like find you a loving Virgo friend. That's all I'm saying. A well-organized Virgo friend. And so I went back and I was like, oh, yeah, this is like, she had basically created, with like a sort of, editorial bent, sort of pulled out about 60 pieces of my writing that sort of formed like the nub of it. And then I started kind of pulling in some other things and just saying, well, like this kind of having a framework around it. So it was like, it wasn't even like I was like, and now I will write this book. It is time to tell the story of my life or whatever. And it was just sort of like this thing that just sort of was like, oh, and here's your memoir.
Right.
Like, do you want to take a look at it before, and I gave it to my editor, Naomi Huffman, who also edited my previous book. And she was like, okay, I'll put it in order. And so in this weird way, I was a little bit in the back seat on this one, where it was like other people are like, oh, yes, I see what this is supposed to be.
That's nice, because if you're working with people that you really trust,
yes,
and who seem to get you, and you can be like, well.
Yeah, and people like, super smart, radical women who I could entrust my work and who could understand like a vision in it that maybe I wouldn't have come to it and been like, and let's do these pieces in this order. And so the book was sort of pulled together and organized by other people. So when I started editing it for real, there was parts where it was like, I mean, I probably hadn't read them since I wrote them 14 years before. So It was like when I got to this little like piece about this like glowing, blood red Trump Tower that I see in the distance, I was like, because it was 12 years later or something. So there's parts of the book that are like, they were sometimes weirdly a surprise to me. Or right. Things that I didn't even remember until I was rereading them, which is, it was a very strange, it was like the opposite of writing a book.
That's
in a weird
interesting.
way, because so much of it was already written. It was just a lot of it was like clarifying what I had already written, basically.
One thing I've been meditating on a lot lately is how so much of creativity and memory is very wrapped into destruction in certain ways. Your memory, we always rely on our memories, but really our memories are completely distorting what happened based on our own biases and whatever other factors. And with creating, you're just sort of also destroying by virtue of the fact that what you're making was not there before. And I guess also just thinking about, wow, Chicago, DC, all of these different urban big cities have changed so much since 2004, 2008. Was that something that you were consciously thinking about while you were starting to piece this together? Or was it like, well, it's already present, so I'm just going to let that exist?
No, I mean, that was totally it, because if you look in the front of the book, I made a little, I drew a little map that they turned into a map that was in proper scale. And I just started denoting where all the things in the book take place on this map, because it's really in a little space. And then after I did that, I was like, oh, a little bit more than a third of these things are gone. And 2 of them have even gone away since I had turned the map in, like whatever, 5-6 months ago. And some of these places are places that like didn't particularly matter to the culture of Chicago per se, like the hot dog spot that's like up in Wicker Park. That was like definitely the place where frat boys went and got hot dogs after last call. So like not necessarily like a place I was like dying to hang out, but something that very much did define a space in time. Like a space where sort of, I don't say like the cultures of Chicago would clash, but 2 different gentrifying forces running into each other, after last call, basically. But that, some of the other things are like the DIY spaces that were house venues or, short-lived kind of things that we were doing that were really, important to that year in Chicago. But they're not so important that somebody's ever going to even do like an oral history of it. Sure. It's so long gone. It was so, something that lasted for 9 months, 12 years ago. But I still feel like it was really important, and also something that really fundamentally is kind of the part of the fundamental character of Chicago, of like a city that, especially in terms of music, is often drawing people in, whether they are coming there as students or it's like you're like, oh, my band's going to move here from like Louisville, or, like Chicago's definitely like a place that people move to within the Midwest. And so in that way, it's also, because it's still an affordable city to a certain extent, that you can come there with your big idea and try to make your big idea happen and have different community and stakes than you might in, say, New York or LA. And so for me, I'm kind of like this, to kind of a corny degree, like a booster for Chicago, where I'm just like, I want people to stay. I want people to move back. I'm like always telling people like, the rent's still kind of cheap here. And, like you can come do your band. You can come do your weird art project. Come start your thing here. And I think that's one of it being a place where you can come and participate and really find that space and time, that community, I think makes Chicago really alluring. But also it's like, there was part of me that wanted to document these things too, in part so that we could kind of remember how to build things, if that makes sense. Because I think sometimes it really alarms me how much music community in particular and creative communities rely on these like massive corporate platforms to promote and communicate and connect, and that there's still a part of me that really not I feel that wants to remember the old ways, but that like that there's still something like I feel like we're gonna need that. I feel like that's really important.
Absolutely. It's well, what I was thinking of while you were saying that was, you're like, oh, this hot dog stand, it wasn't important to the culture of Chicago, but then that begs the question, well, what is the culture, like capital letters, of Chicago? Who gets to decide these things? Like, isn't that subjective, based on who you ask? And maybe everyone making room for the subjective realities of so many different people in a city or in any community. It's a similar thing to what you're saying about like, well, why do these creative communities always have to rely on this sort of top-down model? Why do we always have to rely on other people sort of imposing their stories and ideas on us of like, this is what a culture is or something? I feel like I'm starting to ramble and philosophize here, so maybe we should open the floor to questions. There's probably lots that I'm not even getting to with what I'm asking about, so if you have a question about this or about Jessica's writing,
Chad has a question.
Yeah. I have a question. Great.
Hi, Chad.
It'll probably be a good one.
I'm convinced that you created the word mansplaining.
Whoa.
I think it was you. And I feel like I saw it years before it was popularized on the internet.
That's amazing.
On your blog. This sort of brings up the thing that I'm interested in, which is your invention of words and etymology and syntax that I feel like was a feature of your work. And I wonder if that is something you've had to rein in as you work with other larger publications, or if that's something if that's a challenge or whatever. But I just want to say, I think you invented mansplaining.
That's amazing. I had no idea. I believe that.
I don't think I did, but I do remember that word existing before people saying it started existing like a couple of years ago. But I'm not saying that to try to bolster your theory.
We should all research this.
Okay. I mean, you can, right? So what if I did and I don't know it?
And then that's a great.
Wild. That's wild.
You could do a whole nother tour just
get up
being
in the, get
the
up
woman
in the
who
wiki
invented
and correct history.
the term mansplaining.
But yeah, I mean, that was something that in pulling this book together, it was interesting to see parts of my almost just like as like a clinically as like an editorial force, like look at my writing and see the parts that transferred into my writing that's like for a more like public audience, like when I wrote for, you know, the parts that would make it into like the Chicago Reader, the Tribune, or Spin, or GQ, like how much of my weirdness in my writing, my like the unconventional parts of my writing, how the different places where I could still sort of push that in, because I think that is kind of the part that tends to I don't want to say get eroded, but it just gets edited out because you can't make up words in, you know, the one piece I've written in the Sunday New York Times Magazine. But that, to me, that I think that's kind of like the I don't say like the value of this book in some ways, because I think it has hopefully multiple values, but that it's like this is essentially like my natural writing style. This is just how I write normal, and it's just all sort of like crunkly and filled with made up words, and like I'm really prone to alliteration, and there's just weird little holdovers. But I mean that was like that was kind of the great thing about coming up in fanzines and even formative blog writing, is that it allowed those of us who are doing it to really develop and hone our voice, because we're lots of times writing every single day and definitely wanting to, you know, convince the world of who we were. I certainly was, but that the practice of doing that every day really allowed me to have such a weird voice, I guess. Thanks for such a great question.
Who's got another question?
Hi. Could you talk about how you broke into paid writing and maybe any advice you might have for someone looking to do that?
So I broke into paid writing by accident when I was in high school. I was doing my fanzine, and the editor of City Pages, which was the weekly in Minneapolis where I was growing up, was like, do you want to write some record reviews? And, you know, getting a $30 check in high school was like pretty remarkable. But when I it was like another 10 years after that of just like kind of freelancing on the side of other things that I was doing, particularly in music, and making my fanzine the whole time. And so when I actually decided to go like full-time freelance, I mean, I literally had no idea if it would work. I just jumped into it with my fingers crossed, basically. And to my great surprise, the ground sort of rose to meet my feet. And I could almost make a living writing concert previews in 2004. I think the hard part about giving advice about it is that I know that I had a really unconventional way in. Pretty much everybody else I know went to journalism school. A bunch of people I know who are like, you know, my peers in like a certain echelon of music criticism. You know, some of them are like, they all went to Ivy League schools. I didn't go to college, and I just figured out how to do this by doing it, basically. And so my suggestion of how to do it is like a way that I don't know if it's possible for people still to do it. The things that I found that were most instructive to me in terms of forming a career and finding my voice was finding editors that I could trust, that were invested in me. I don't know if that's necessarily a thing that super exists here in internet time. But that the other thing that was really crucial for me was being able to have the time to develop my own voice and basically do my own sort of like my own journalism school, you know, just reading and having the space and time to just absorb the world and then try to process it and write daily. No one ever offered me a job in journalism until I was 39 years old. I'm 42. And so for a long time, I just did whatever the fuck I wanted and see if people would pay me. So I feel like I'm a bad person to ask for practical advice. But I mean, the main things that helped me were like read widely, find editors that I trusted, write every day. You know, and part of the way that I learned to write was like, you know, I knew how to write really voicey record reviews and concert previews and just about stuff that I cared about, but I wanted to have another challenge. So like I started pitching the Chicago Tribune, which has like a very fixed sort of style, and you're writing for a super mainstream audience who don't know what the hell you're talking about, and let that be my education. The ways that I learned most were by failing and doing things poorly. And that's something that I know is like people are especially fearful to do that on the internet in this day and age. And so I don't know, those are the things that worked for me, but thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Who's got another one? Also, if more people want to line up at the microphones, like, you know, I'm just saying, I think that's fine.
Obviously, the book is capturing a snapshot of your life, 2004 to 2008. How much do you still identify with the person in the book? How much do you feel like you've changed as a person?
That's a great question. I'm very, as I was doing like subsequent edits of the book, I felt very, very grateful to, you know, 27, 28-year-old me in the book. Like I felt very, in a funny way, I felt snapped back to that, or sort of in some ways even called out by my, you know, as one might imagine, you know, your 28-year-old self has some different dogmatic ideals and principles that maybe don't entirely, you know, fit with being a suburban mom at 42. But I also just felt like, I felt excited too by the parts of the ways that I did recognize that self being intact within me. And then other ways that I felt, there's a line, I'm not being super articulate, but there's a line in there where I say something like, if I'm not living my most hopeful politics at like the ripe old age of 29, then what the hell am I doing? And like, reader, I gasped. And I was like, it was a very like, bitch, get your life together moment. And, but that I was like, I can do that. I am still doing that in some ways, but I can do that a lot better. And that was, for me, that was like that line was, rereading that line for the first time again, was like, it sort of it reset a particular orbit in my life that was like a great spiritual gift and a great gift as a writer. And so it's like I feel some of the ways in which I felt distant closed. But yeah, I mean, I also was musing to my husband like last night or 2 nights ago. There's like, I mean, the apartment that I live in, so at the beginning of the book, my rent is $250. And then and then my roommate moved out and was $500. And that was a lot of money for me then as a young writer. But that apartment was truly disgusting. It was truly disgusting, and I didn't own a vacuum. So there's like there's some ways in which I'm very grateful to have a lot of distance for 28-year-old me that was like, it's gross, but this is what I deserve, probably. Like that part of you that's just like, can kind of see adulthood in the distant horizon and is maybe kind of like, no. But there's definitely some ways where it's like, no, that would be good for that part of your life to get here. And so there's things that I'm glad I'm distant from, and then other parts where this book pulled me closer to something essential of who I was as a writer. Because also right before I was starting to work on this book, I had like a huge crisis of confidence and was positive. I was just like, maybe I'm just someone who has regular jobs now, and maybe I'm done writing, which seems really bizarre because this is like literally my only marketable skill. And I don't know, was I going to babysit? Like, I don't know what I thought I was going to do, but I was like, maybe I'm done because I hadn't.
Just before writing this book?
Just before I started.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
like in January. Like I was just like, I had just been editing for years. I hadn't been writing. I hadn't had a byline in 3 years, and I had no idea if I could still do it. Yeah. And so that sort of, this book kicked my ass, and I started writing again. And that is what I do now professionally, believe it or not.
That's great.
So how old are your kids going to be before they are allowed to read the book?
Oh, the only book they are allowed to read is my first book, and that's because it's for tweens. They don't get to read anything else. Thank you.
I've been following your career for a long time, and it wasn't until you read that section about the Latino, which we should probably say Latinx or Latin American, section that I felt so disconnected from you in a way that I felt like, whoa, okay, it seems like you're describing this part of Chicago that you obviously weren't a part of. And for the Latin American community there, where my family happens to also be from, the most dangerous part of Chicago that you describe it. And I'm just wondering why you decided to speak that way about that part of Chicago and bring that into your book in a way where it feels so disconnected from your audience of brown and people. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The part... I'm sorry that my work.
And I don't mean to be disrespectful.
No,
just
no,
I
you're
followed
not
you for so long time, and
disrespectful.
all of a sudden I was
No.
like, whoa, that's weird.
The part of. I think you're talking about the part where I'm talking about Pilsen.
The part that you read today.
Yeah, I'm sorry that anything in my work made you feel distant from and disconnected, or that I wasn't invested in people of color who are in my audience. And I received that. I think that is.
I guess I just encourage you in the future, because you've had like places like Pitchfork and all of these places you have access to, like our communities constantly left out, and then to hear you like read what you read and kind of describe us as like this outside kind of entity of sorts. It was like, gosh, here's this person that has all this like influence and this access, and then you say that in your book, and it's almost like then there's that weird place that we're then put into again, and like don't go down that scary street or whatever when people actually live there, so it's just kind of trying to understand the words that you use are so powerful among so many different people that to think differently about it in the future. That's it.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Does anybody else have a question?
He was asking about do I identify with the song Night Moves? I'm a non-closeted Bob Seger fan.
I was gonna ask at the beginning, like, has that been a question on every stop
No,
of this book
weirdly
tour?
enough not. But that I really identify with there's the line in the book that the title came from. I was just driving down Lakeshore Drive and this song came on, like just having this deeply corny experience of listening to Bob Seger on a summer night, like, Chicago comes into view. Like it was extremely corny. And of course, naturally, that is then where I was like, that's it. I gotta call the book Night Moves, like, whatever. But it was there's a line in there about, having a sense of like, basically not having a sense of very much to lose. And that realization very much comes from like the distance, the sort of measuring that space from like adult distance from it. But I do like Bob Seger's work. Yes. I am affectionate towards his work. I don't rebuke Bob Seger. I don't.
We have time for one more question here.
I was just wondering if you would say a little more about corniness and the value of that, if you see that as sincerity or if you see it as something that you sort of spoke about it being corny in a way that I don't know if you're mocking it or not.
I think I tend to think of a lot of things that we think of like as typical rock canon as being kind of fundamentally corny, and that is part of their value. But maybe that's sort of my like aging punk ironic distance, being like, this is not entirely my thing, though I do like it, and having that as sort of a qualifying thing in order to comfort myself, to pretend I still have taste as an old person.
I wish we could have like a whole nother 45 minutes to talk about like corniness as a concept and sentimentality, and it's really interesting because I feel like when you are a writer, an artist, whatever, you're constantly told to sort of avoid these things. But yeah, then it's like these are cultural touchstones for everybody for a reason. So yeah, anyway.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jessica.